I'd like to talk now a bit more about consciousness and divinity. And in the previous talk, I've mixed consciousness and divinity as the same thing, which I do think they are. They're just different words for the same thing. I need to stop this for a second. So I was running out of power on my computer, normal stuff. And I want to mention about time and now, here and now, and space and solidness and those things. When you actually look at it, well, when I've looked at it, and I think the conclusion the scientists have come to is that everything is energy forms. There's no such thing as solidness. For example, when my finger runs into the other finger, that we might think, I might conclude that it's solid because actually it can't go past one stopping the other. But actually, it's just like two North Pole magnets. When you push them together, they resist. And it's just that the magnetic force here is incredibly strong. So it appears that the energy structure of my body is so strong that it does resist like that. And it appears to be solid, but it's not. It's just an energy structure running into another energy structure. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it does seem to appear that we have space and time, but actually I don't think we do. Time, the way we've manufactured it, is made up. We make up time by pretending that something is, in a way that we can measure. It's a very useful device because it means that we can do all sorts of things because of time. We can plan days and we can plan our activities, just for example, and we can measure things in time and all that. But actually, it's a fiction. And the closer you get to the extremities of it, like the world is constantly expanding, or there's nothing faster than the speed of light, it becomes slightly absurd, or very absurd, and it doesn't explain anything. It makes a nonsense of, it just doesn't work when you take it too far. It's a very useful device, time, but it's fictitious. Whereas now is never ending. Now doesn't exist in time. Time exists in now, but now doesn't exist in time. Now is the only thing that ever is, and no one has ever left it. You can't leave now. Now is permanent. It's an ever-continuing, everlasting moment that isn't a moment and doesn't exist in time. It's outside of the concept of time, and so is space, and so is here. So here, if we say I'm in the here and now, here isn't a space or location, and time isn't either. Here, now isn't either in time. Time and space are made up within the context of now and here. So now and here are qualities of divinity or consciousness, not the other way around. So it's quite useful to get those two things sorted out, really, to know the difference. I'd also like to talk about the states of awakening. We like to think we're awake. Really? Well, there's three states which are pretty obvious. One is when we're really asleep, in deep sleep. Sleep has two patterns to it, superficial and deep. Well, the deep sleep is definitely unconscious. We don't know anything that's going on. We can't register anything. The burglar could walk through the room and we wouldn't know. So deep sleep is really sleep. And actually, the other type of sleep, the eye movement sleep, when we're busy, is light sleep. It's still a form of sleep, but it's a sleep in which we are much more alert. And of course, a mother with a child sleeping in the room, the young child, is very alert on some level, even though she can be completely asleep. The sound, the tiniest sound, will switch her into alert and different levels of alert. But fundamentally, that's unconscious. And then there's awakening. In the morning, we wake up and we think we're awake, but we're not. The Indian term for it is maya. But actually, all we do is we go into a sort of automatic state where we think we are awake when we're not. So we can talk and we can move and do things and work and all that. But it's still fundamentally a sort of semi-sleep state. And it's certainly not an awakened state. You can't get to see this very easily unless you work with a awakened master of some form, and there's many of them about today. Internet's full of them, YouTube's full of them. If you hang out with them, online or live, you can gradually get to see and become awakened. And you can see that they are awake and they live in consciousness all the time. Although they have a human body, they reside in consciousness, which is our true nature, but they reside there permanently. They don't dip into the human race, human side, get lost in it, and then come back a little bit later into divinity, like most of us do. I reside in human stuff most of the time, and occasionally I can move out into consciousness. Or I do, like I said, I dip in and out all the time, but my dipping in and out is still quite biased in that I'm working more in the unconscious state and more familiar with it than the conscious state. Whereas an awakened person is living in consciousness and can manifest into the human state, but is not trapped by it or in believing in it or run by it. Whereas I would say I'm run more by my human state and my emotions and my beliefs and that nonsense which we inherit and acquire in growing up. What? Nonsense, a bit critical. Anyway, if we ignore that slight critical aspect to my nature, I inherited that. I don't know where from, but I did. There is the divine bit is, so that there are three states, if you like: asleep, waking, which is a form of sleep, and awakened. And those three states are something that we all know and do, and most of us don't really get to see and understand the awakened state. So if you want to do that, you have to hang out, as far as I can see, with one of the self-realized people that, as I say, you can find on YouTube endlessly, and you can find sites where they give personal instruction and such like, and they're excellent, they're fantastic. They've got it. And you might think that you could do that too. And some people do flock to them. At some points in my life, there were millions of people going to Sai Baba or Osho or Sri Bhagwan Ranish at the time, his name was. Millions of people. They did all sorts. They did meetings by helicopter because there were so many of them. But so that it's not that millions of people don't recognize their divinity. You know, if you go around the world, actually, it must be that more than half the world's population actively engages in divine practices every day. But that's only the superficial level, as I talked about. And the deeper level, as I talked about before, is that we dip in and out of divinity every second of every day. And if I go deeper into that, I can say that right now, when I'm speaking, every word I say I'm receiving from the divine. And every one of us who speaks or acts or does anything, what we do is we tap into the divine, get the information, the connection, the divine spark, and we translate it. And we can do it so efficiently, like I am now. I'm doing it word for word, line for line. That's how it works. It's so fast. If we look deeper into consciousness, consciousness is the attribute of the divine creative force. I think in the first book of the Bible it's called Genesis. And that's really about creation. And the way I see it is the whole universe is created in this moment by the divine force or divine energy or whatever you like to call it. And if we could, it's in a theoretical experiment, switch off divinity, the entire universe would disappear utterly and completely. There wouldn't even be a grain of sand left, because there is no grain of sand anyway. It's all energy in motion, so to speak. Everything is energy in motion, held together by patterns. My human form is an energy in motion, held together by an inherited pattern of genetics and epigenetics, etc. And it appears to be solid and in time and space, but it's not. So there's this energy that we call God, divine, consciousness, truth. It's all totally beyond our conception. It's absolutely, while we work with it and we can recognize it in ourselves and acknowledge it and recognize it in others, the actual nature of it is beyond our comprehension. We just don't have the equipment. It doesn't respond to words, thoughts, energy, research, and such like experiments. It's not a knowable thing. Knowing is a delusion that human beings think they have. There isn't such a thing as knowing. Another thing about human beings is that with consciousness, the human form is really another method of understanding this whole process is what the Catholics do is they have God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. Well, God the Father is this divine creative force which creates the entire universe. God the Son, we could say, is the soul, the particular divinity, that aspect of divinity or consciousness that we are. And I, for example, say that I've had 23 lifetimes as a healer consecutively. And, you know, that may or may not be true, but it's a nice idea. But it gives you the idea of that we live many, many lives, thousands of lives, with the same continuity. We don't go cat, ant, human, kangaroo, flower, stone. We go human, 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 with very similar characteristics or ways of learning, so that the process of our own divine expression builds up and manifests deeper and deeper. That's how it really works. And there's no way that we have of changing that. I did want to say something about the last book of the Bible too. The last book of the Bible is called the Revelation of St. John the Divine. And if you actually, it can be read on about 3 different levels. It's a superficial level, the story as told. But if you can get down to the 3rd level, it's really a chakra manual. And what I mean by chakra manual, it's a manual of the structure of the human body. And it describes it accurately. And it has 7 centers of energy. And the scientists say we are energy, so this is not a disputable sort of, well, that's the nature of everything is energy. So, so the body is formed around energy structures, as focuses rather. So there's one at the base of the spine called the earth chakra or the sacral chakra. And there's one bit further up, which is the sexual center or the creative center. And then there's one further up, which is in the abdomen, which is the energy center, and one in the heart, which is the love center, and where you can meet God through love. And then there's the voice, which is the singing and the voice center. And then there's the mind, which is here, which is the third eye, which has amazing mentality possibilities as against thinking. And then finally, there's the crown chakra up here, which is where we sort of connect to divinity. And all the so-called esoteric teachings basically come down to what's in the Revelations of St. John the Divine. It's well hidden in that chapter, but then so is creation in Genesis in a way. And the Bible they refer to the Bible in a way as the Alpha and Omega, Alpha being the first chapter, Omega being the last chapter. They're the 2 most important books of the Bible. And the rest of it is a story. It's interesting stories, but it's basically a story. And that the Bible is really a book which is on 3 levels, which contains the fundamental teachings of the human race, well hidden so that they're not lost to posterity, well hidden and thoroughly mistranslated, has to be said. For example, Satan is not Satan at all. There's no Satan. There is no good and evil in this world. If you analyze it from a divine perspective, everything is perfect. There's never anything in anybody's life or anything that's happening on the planet which is not perfect. It's always perfect. It's never going to stop being perfect. It doesn't matter if it's a war, it's genocide, and I've worked in war and genocide zones and such like, and there's nothing evil. All these are concepts generated by the human condition, by us humans, but actually from a divine point of view, it's always perfect. Famous modern gurus, Wayne Dyer, for example, he wrote, let's say, a meter or a yard deep of books. So millions and tens or maybe even 100 million words over his life. But he summarized his final conclusion of life is be kind, not right. And that summarizes it. Be kind is the nature of divinity, our divine part. And if we're kind, that's the way to meet God. It's that simple. It's not the way to meet truth, because it's not the same thing. But if you want to be God, experience the God in you, the divinity in you, just be kind. And the body, the human body, wants to be right or wrong, good and evil, and all that nonsense. No sense, if I take that word apart. There's never been any evil in this world. I used to joke that the Catholic Church dreamt up evil, which equals hell, as a way of getting into church, getting money into the church system, to drive people to church, because they would take their money and then relieve them of having to live in evil and hell. There's just no such thing. It's all perfect. Another great teacher, Darfree John, he changed to Adida, I think, at the end of his life. He said, he likewise wrote another long pile of books, a meter high, millions and millions and millions of words. And his final conclusion was, observation was, what we are is consciousness. And he thought it was the birthright of every kid to be told this. What we are is consciousness, or what I call divinity or God. That's like summarizing, like a whole lifetime of approaching divinity. It's that simple. We are divine with a temporary human experience. If you're interested in becoming more divine, it's quite a struggle on some level, because there's nothing which, there's lots of obstacles called being human. We've inherited enormous numbers of animal traits, especially our survival instincts: freeze, fright. Freeze, number one, fight and flight. And these drive a lot of our emotions. And when life comes into contradiction with our beliefs, we get emotions. These emotions are essentially negative, like hurt and pain and judgment and jealousy and whatever we get into, anger, sadness, grief, all those things. They're all essentially driven by survival instincts. And they become really big hurdles to get over. So what we've discovered in source medicine, which is where I've been involved in for the last 20 years, I've been evolving a new system of what you might call personal transformation, which works for diseases and works for dysfunctions, and helps in the releasing our obstacles to being who we are, divinity, to being our divinity. There's a lot of different obstacles and hurdles, you might say. It's a bit like a hurdles race. So you can inherit all sorts of obstacles, which in essence boil down to trauma, a sort of post-traumatic stress disorder. And everything that we've inherited, as far as I can see, boils down to post-traumatic stress disorders, which manifest in different ways. For example, I'm suggesting that epidemic diseases are individual forms of a particular post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a device. Well, I need to explain post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, as it seems to reside in the amygdala, the reptilian brain, and it's a repetitive broken record phenomena. And it's like it goes round and it's round and around, and it doesn't resolve. And when that happens, the information goes out to the emotional brain, the mammalian brain, the brain that developed when we started nurturing babies with breasts on the breasts in animal form. And that comes up as resentments and grief and sadness and such like. And it contradicts our beliefs, and our beliefs, if you like, are held in the thinking brain, and they come from, and we have developed this amazingly large piece of thinking material in the front of our heads, which holds all sorts of stuff which is fundamentally untrue. And that gets into conflict with these early traumas. And so post-traumatic stress disorder is a sign what I'm saying about it is the way everything gets stuck in the amygdala, in the reptilian brain. Tiny bits of trauma get stuck and go round and round and round. And they can manifest as epidemic diseases, en bloc, en masse in the human race, and yet unique to each person. They can manifest as, and we can inherit the effects of epidemic diseases, which is much more important. So we inherit the effects of tuberculosis or gonorrhea or syphilis. And some of the state characters on the world stage at the moment are very clearly manifesting inherited syphilis. They don't know it, and they don't have syphilis. I'm not saying they ever have syphilis, but they have the inherited effects of syphilis. And these are hurdles to, they're both the strengths and the weaknesses. They force you into a ridiculous human body form behavior. And from this, there's a chance to wake up when you see how crazy it is. And so everything, so that brings me to another slight side topic, which is everything that happens to us in our lives is really aimed at waking us up. Waking us up is the whole game plan of life on planet Earth. Waking us up from our animal form to our divine form. Our divine form's running us all the time anyway, but waking up to that is the name of the game of life on planet Earth at the moment. And I'm imagining that at some point when we're fully awakened, we won't need to take these animal form bodies, and we will evolve into some other species in another type of form, just as we were before we became humans. In my understanding and my experience of what I've seen, before we were human bodies, we were gaseous bodies. Then there was two levels of those gaseous bodies. One was without weight, without sex, and very floaty, so to speak, and hardly grounded at all. And it was then connected up very loosely with a tribe of animals or with the animal kingdom. And then the next level of density down, we developed a sexuality and a bit of thinking, but it was still very light and very little weight. And then finally, we managed to make the transition into being fully engaged with the animal kingdom. And out of that came the human, which is the first semi-fully integrated divine form, of animal form with the divinity fully engaged. That's roughly the story of the human race as I understand it from my investigations. And yeah, so we are, if you like, a species in transition. And right now, of course, we face this potential global catastrophe where we've corrupted the planet from so many different ways that it's hard to see how the human race can survive, or much of life on Earth can survive. It won't matter from the point of view of Earth. It will, if everything dies off, it will just regenerate it in 1 million years and we'll be back to a new form of life and a new awakening sequence for a new type of being. But we as humans might not exist, might exist in a modified form, or we might get depleted to a very high degree. For example, right now, the plastic is having an effect on our fertility, and fertility is diving down at such a speed that in 50 to 100 years we may not be able to reproduce. But that would solve the problem of too many people. There just wouldn't be, they would just die out. There would be a situation. And there's so many other scenarios where overheating could stop the food supply. Toxins could kill the bees and all the other insects would pollinate, and so there wouldn't be crops. So when you actually start totting up all the different possibilities, there's enormous forces at work which are leading to the destruction of life on Earth. That doesn't really matter because we are divine beings, we're not humans. If that seems cruel, I'm not meaning to say that. It means that we will be forced to evolve. And evolution is what we're doing. We're evolving from into divine beings in physical bodies. And once we've done that, even if it means we sort of wreck the planet in the process, we will carry on as divine beings, and that process, which is beyond our comprehension, will continue. And as I said, it's perfect. Everything is perfect. There's never anything that isn't perfect from a divine point of view. It's going back to becoming more divine or becoming more aware of divinity. If you hang out with regularly, I mean regularly, you can do it now. Every week, every day, you can hang out with the same guru online, and they're available and they're answering questions and they work with individuals, and you can get in touch with the nature of divinity. It's a big step, and it's a lot of steps to it, because it's like you're walking out of darkness into the light, and you can't even see the staircase, and you can't even see the steps or the path. And it gradually lightens up as you make further steps. It takes a lot of courage. It takes the willingness to confront the stuff that's human, and it's a deep change in your observation or your experience of yourself. And what you find, and that's the point I wanted to make, is that what you find is that the human being is hollow. As I said, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. The human being is the Holy Ghost. It appears to be a solid, conscious, a solid piece of material which does thinking and action and talking and all that, but it's not. There's no core to a human being. There's no confidence. No one as a human being can be confident. It's not there. You can't have self-esteem. That's not the nature of the human body. What you can have is divinity operating effectively. And when you tune in to divinity, which many of us do all the time, unconsciously, but we are operating with our divinity, we can act with complete and utter confidence, because we are tapping into or being the divine. And like me, you might be like me, you can do it part of the time and only partially, even when you're doing it part of the time. I'm not that skilled at it. You know, I'm aware that as I'm talking, I'm tapping into the divine every word I say, but I'm only just aware of that. And I can pretend that it's me talking. Oh, me, my human being, me. And actually, my human being, me, is corrupting and distorting and twisting everything I say, everything that comes in to me. It's a bit like choreography. You know, the choreographer gets an idea of how she wants to dance to run. But then she's got to interpret that into the dancers. And the dancers have got all their own ideas of, oh, I've got a big ego, I want to show off, I want to be this, I want to be that, and or I'm devoted to doing this to the best of my ability, and everything in between. So you've got all these ego numbers running in the dancers, which you want to perform what you're going to perform. And then you've got the audience. And it depends, you know, if your audience was, say, top football players, who might all be very aware of their aesthetic nature because they have to perform in football, then the dancers might perform magnificently because they're being listened to by people with awareness of what's subtle and what is amazing about what they're doing. You know, you can imagine a footballer being absolutely unable to do the splits, but being amazed by someone doing the splits. And all the subtleties that dancers can do. And so, and you can also imagine that lots of footballers will be great dancers. But if you come across some people who have no sort of bodily sense, you know, they just say, I can't dance. And there are people who just say, I can't dance. There's whole continents where that's like Africa, where if you can't dance, you're not alive. You know, everybody dances. So everybody can dance, but some people's egotistical human nature is so frozen in some survival instinct that they cannot allow themselves to dance. It's just too scary. So if you have an audience of totally scared of dancing, in front of a choreographer and their team, their group of dancers, it would be a very different experience. So all I'm saying is that there's the choreographer, who's like the divine, there's the dancers, like the humans with some divinity, and there's the audience, which is likewise human with divinity or closed off or frozen in fear or whatever. And all those three go to make up the performance. And it's like that for everything. It can never be, the choreographer will never be satisfied on some level with what was delivered, because it's not the same as the pure impulse they received. But, but they also, if they're realistic, they know it's never going to be perfect. And that was the best they could do in the circumstances, and they can sleep tight at night on that one. So the point I was making about the hurdles is that in source resonances, we've created a new technology, which is basically divine technology, which allows us to listen to sounds which have divinity embedded in them, which can release some of the hurdles to our own manifesting our true divine nature. And these hurdles all boil down to different forms of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder being the key of all traumas. And that trauma can be an epidemic disease, it can be an inherited effect of epidemic disease, that trauma. It can be an inherited belief, it can be an inherited effect of a toxin, it can be the acquired effect of a toxin, it can be a physical trauma like an operation or an injury, and it can be a psychological trauma like a rape or genocide or whatever. It can. But we've made source resonances to help dissolve, or not dissolve, these hurdles to self-realization and to becoming more aware of our true nature. And they resolve because they untangle the divine trauma, the trauma behind what's there, and they free it up so it can, instead of being a broken record, the track is rejoined and it's no longer there. And it only takes a second or two, fundamentally, although because people think more is better, they tend to listen longer, and it can take longer. So it's a way of helping us, it's a way of helping us unfold our consciousness. So source resonances have these, it's a new technology which allows us to make progress in this field. It's allowed me to make progress in this field, even if I was the person who first invented it. And I don't want to, there's books, we've written books, and there's whole websites about it. But basically, we've developed this technology, I call it source technology, and we've made about 7 major leaps forward in how we've implemented it from the very first beginning stages, where we used it for treating HIV very successfully in Africa, and it's still the best treatment for HIV in Africa. Anyway, you can read all about that, and there's this huge new, or this wonderful new technology which I've been involved in helping create, which allows us to make steps forward from being unconscious, asleep, suffering humans to being awakened, enlightened, happy, conscious human beings. And it is a big journey. Let's not underestimate it. That's why we have many lives, because it can't be done in one. It might be doable in this particular one for you, or me, or maybe lots of people, but it's not, what I see is that most people take many lifetimes at it. It's quite obvious if you look at the speed at which they change. They don't. And they're very slow. And that's okay, because there is no time and space, and so going back to the fact that the human life, the whole purpose of life is to waken up. That's my conclusion about it. And we waken up through whatever we do. And if you like, we've got choices on planet Earth. We either can suffer by resisting change, to resisting awakening, then the forces of awakening will deepen the process so that we suffer more until we choose to wake up. Or we can take the suffering that we come across in our daily lives and use that as the sort of grist to the mill to allow ourselves to wake up. And source resonances are aids to that process. They're not this, they can't work without the grist to the mill. But if you're struggling or you recognize where you're at, the source resonances can help facilitate that process by unlocking whatever's locked up, and you then can wake up a little bit. So, and as far as I know, it's the first, in a way, divine technology, of a conscious divine technology of this type. You could say herbalism, for example, was a divine technology because the herbs grew before the humans, and the humans, the animals knew before humans ever evolved what herbs to use for what problems they had. And those problems they had, to some extent, those herbs allowed them to cure themselves, and in the process of curing, become a little bit more conscious, preparing the way for human race. And the herbs now, you know, they've existed from the time before humans ever existed. And they're the forerunners, if you like, of medicine today. And this, what we're doing is a step forward beyond that, which is going straight to the divine source and creating resonances to resolve, to facilitate the transition from suffering to awakening. So I think I've summarized everything I want to say on this video. And so I think I've finished everything I want to say. About this journey on life. And sourcemedicine.zone is the place where you could get more information, or you can get more information. And my name's Peter Chappell. Okay, bye.